there were two professors in the department who had been there in 1939. And both men said, hands down, Kenny Washington was the far better athlete to Jackie Robinson. And that kind of took me by surprise. And Artie said when he was a high school baseball coach and teacher, there was a PE coach at his high school who had been a teammate. He had been on that 39 UCLA football team. And that this guy was not a boastful guy. He wasn't one of these guys always throwing around a lot of hyperbole. But he said very matter-of-factly, Kenny Washington was far better than Jackie Robinson. Well, that's all I needed to hear. That got me doing the deep dive. And to learn about this guy was absolutely amazing. I was completely overwhelmed by just how good he was, just how popular he was in Los Angeles, far and away the most popular athlete in Southern California during the 30s and 40s. And it was just emotional to see, what could have been had America been different at that time.
Join me, Jeremy Swick, on Into the Unknown, a podcast that delves into the personal journeys, stories, and experiences of individuals across diverse professions. As a historian by trade, I firmly believe that our personal histories shape our present and offer valuable insights into our paths ahead. With that being said, let's get into it. On this episode of Into the Unknown, I am joined with a very special guest, Dan Taylor. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. It's good to be with you.
I really appreciate you taking the time, and, I can't complain. It's almost the holidays, and I'm just excited for both of us to be here.
Well, it's always good to talk football, and in this case, particularly Kenny Washington, someone that I have this great admiration for, and just a tremendous, tremendous story, and it was an honor to be involved with telling his story.
I couldn't agree more. For those who are watching, I'm going to stand up a little bit, but I have my NFL Kenny Washington shirt. I was fortunate to talk to the guy who created it the other day, and hopefully he'll be joining the podcast soon as well.
Terrific.
I'll start the show off with networking and talking about the importance. How did we get acquainted?
Well, we got acquainted through a friend of yours who is a great Kenny Washington admirer, and he sent to me something that he had put together, which I thought was fascinating. It was a correlation of not just the career, but the life of both Kenny Washington and his UCLA teammate, Jackie Robinson, and just a number of very interesting things that occurred throughout their careers and their life. And then he later mentioned your podcast, and thought this would be a fun connection to make, and I wholeheartedly agreed. And it was exciting what he did. And he has since sent me an article, a terrific piece that he wrote about the unsung and not remembered member of the 39 UCLA undefeated football team. And that was Johnny Wynn. In my research on Kenny, I found a lot of stuff that was inaccurate about that season, about Kenny, about that team. And one of the common things was that there were only 4 African Americans on that 39 team, which was significant. Don't get me wrong. That was significant. But in truth, there were 5. And Johnny Wynn played a big part in that season. He made a goal line tackle late in I believe it was the Washington State game to preserve the undefeated record. And in many cases, he is not remembered in history of that season. So I was delighted to see that was written about, and hopefully he'll be able to land that in some publication to further publicize that.
I really hope so. Jason's been a great guy I've met. It's funny, we talk about Johnny Wynn. We'll get more into it, but I just picked up, I believe, a 1938 yearbook from UCLA, and of course he's in it, and he's in the 40 that yearbook as well. And so it's one of those guys that's very interesting that he wasn't mentioned and isn't really widely talked about.
And probably because he was not one of the starters. The other 4 were starters and were central players. And I think what probably threw people off, we may be digressing here, but still I think it's important. What probably threw people off was a note in one of the Los Angeles papers early in that 39 season saying that Wynn had left the team. And they never followed up on the fact that 2 weeks later he came back. And in researching, it appeared to me Wynn had worked as a porter on the Los Angeles to Chicago and back route on the rail. And it appeared to me that he was summoned for one last run. And that was why he had to leave the team for a couple of weeks. But once he returned, played significant minutes and had some important contributions.
I could not agree more. And we'll get into that a little bit later because I already can feel myself having 30 million thoughts on that, but we'll get into it.
Good.
I want to know that comic book issue origin story. Who are you and where are you from?
I live in Fresno, California, born and raised here in the hometown of Tom Seaver, Jim Maloney, and many, many others. Uh, Television sportscaster by trade. Did that for 30 years here on the local ABC station. And when I left, writing was one of the things that attracted me. I went into corporate PR for 10 years, retired now. The Kenny Washington Project was my fifth book. I'm now working on number seven. And it was just a different form of storytelling. I think in a television sportscast, you're given 2 minutes. And when you get 250 pages, it allows you to go a little bit deeper on a story. So it was a lot of fun. It was a significant transition, a big learning curve. But I find that I greatly enjoy it. I love the research, love storytelling, love sports. So the three of them come together into something that I'm very passionate about continuing.
Dan, I love that. I'm curious, what got you into that broadcasting sphere to begin with?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's kind of interesting, but I was really uh, the sports bug bit me thanks to a grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who was an immigrant from Scotland, and here was this guy who uh, loved soccer, but came here and because he arrived in the U.S. With his parents and was underage, he had graduated from high school in Scotland in a suburb of Glasgow. But when he came here, because he was under 18, they told him that he would have to go back to school. He had not completed American history and would have to go back to school. And he said that one of the things, well, he had two goals in having to go back to school. One was to learn all these American sports that just seemed so crazy to him, and the other was to learn to trade. And so his love of sports was something very important that he passed on to me, and taking me to San Francisco Giants games in the summertime, and talking sports a lot, and that's where I really got bit. I think something I enjoyed was listening to baseball on the radio growing up, and that probably planted a seed somewhere. And I often joked, although I think it's a lot more serious than a joke, that I loved playing sports as a kid, but I found that I could probably talk about it better than I could play it. So that kind of steered me at a pretty young age in the direction of wanting to get into broadcasting. Um, my early ambition was play by play, something that I've only now in retirement really had the time to be able to pursue, doing some of the games, both TV and a little bit of radio for our minor league baseball team here in Fresno, the Grizzlies, and doing some high school football on the local cable. So yeah, it was a fun run. Covered uh, some amazing accomplishments, tremendous athletes coming out of Fresno. Guys from Icky Woods, Bobby Jones, so many guys that went on to have success, and teams that had tremendous success. Fresno State basketball winning the NIT. I broadcast their semifinal game from Madison Square Garden, which was quite a thrill. So yeah, I was very, very fortunate to be involved in covering sports here in Fresno during a really magical time when the teams here, the university, and the professional setting here in Fresno really grew and won some remarkable championships.
That's really interesting. So, out of curiosity, I know a lot of times with broadcasting, we've had a few anchors and different news people on here. Was that your first job, or did you have to bounce around and travel all over?
No, I actually in high school managed to put together my own radio show my senior year in high school. Went and bought some airtime from a small station and would put together a high school football highlights show. And so that was kind of my first step into it. And then my sophomore year at Fresno State, actually my senior year in high school, I also became the public address announcer for the minor league ball club in Fresno. At that time, it was a San Francisco Giants affiliate, and befriended many of the sportscasters in town through that role. And my sophomore year in high school, the sportscaster at the station I ultimately went to work for asked me if I wanted to come in and help him out covering high school football on Friday nights. And then that grew into other opportunities within that company. And that's where I worked for 30 years.
That's incredible.
Very fortunate, very blessed.
Especially, in sports and broadcasting. That's a dream I'm sure, a lot of kids have growing up, and it's amazing you're able to literally make a career out of it. And, over 30, that's incredible.
Very fortunate. Absolutely.
Out of curiosity, do you have any a top moment or two that you would like to share about, a highlight from that experience?
Wow. That's tough. There's so many fun ones. I think, growing up, my dad taking me to Fresno State football games at a time when they were really more like a Division II program, beating, playing schools like a lot of schools in California that don't even have football anymore. Cal State Hayward, Cal State Los Angeles, schools like that, and then the program growing to a point where, with a quarterback by the name of Trent Dilfer at the helm, and a few other players, Lorenzo Neal, who played in the NFL. They defeated USC, and it was such a high point in this community. It was an exciting time in this community. That victory is still talked about very fondly. But for many of us who had been around Fresno State sports, to have it grow to that point, I remember the day following, prior to the game, the day prior to the game, they had a big luncheon there in Anaheim, and it was the Freedom Bowl down in Los Angeles, in Anaheim at that time. And Henry Ellard of the Rams was brought in as the star Fresno State football alumnus. Mike Garrett was the USC alumnus at this luncheon. And Henry and I had a really good relationship. We went to the same high school, a few years apart, of course, but and I was talking to Henry after the luncheon, and I said, "Can you believe these guys are playing USC? I mean, I remember going to games when they played Cal State Hayward and people like that." And he said, "Dan, my first couple of years, I played in games with Cal State Hayward. So no, this is really hard to believe we've reached this level, and then to go out and win the game and beat USC, it was quite a moment." And I think the NIT that season really captivated this community as well. Huge crowds would gather at the airport when the team came home after each of the rounds. And of course, I think there were more than 2,000 people from Fresno went to New York for the semifinals, and then the final when they defeated DePaul to win the NIT. So I think nationally that might be looked at as kind of a second tier event, the NIT, but here it's still held. That '83 NIT championship is a pretty special moment. So to be part of that and to cover that, really meant a lot. In 1988, Fresno State baseball was ranked number one in the country. They had 3 first-round draft picks that tied the University of Michigan for a record. Tom Goodwin, Eddie Zosky, the shortstop, Steve Hosey, one of the outfielders, and I had grown up just a few houses down from the head coach, Bob Bennett, a college baseball legend who's in the College Baseball Hall of Fame. And so to go back and cover that was also a very special time. So I'm very blessed to have the opportunity to be associated with those events.
Dan, I love that you mentioned that. And one of those things, I think sports, being in sports, I was fortunate to be at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and I was the historian and curator at the College Football Hall of Fame for a number of years. How much sports can mean to a community, whether it's good, bad, indifferent. A lot of times it's just you remember where you were when your team won. I mean, I was back, I won't go into too many stories, but just I had flown back from Atlanta to Milwaukee, and when the Bucks won the finals, and I was there for that. For game 6, I was down in the Deer District and stayed for the parade, and it's just there's such a special moment with sports that it's really hard to explain to maybe people on the outside.
Well, you're right. And similarly here in Fresno, for example, you go into auto racing, which is very big around here. And my dad and my uncle, they were able to recite chapter and verse of what they were doing the moment that Bill Vukovich, the great Indy racer, was killed in 1955 in Indianapolis. And I became friends with his son and his grandson, and I was able to cover his grandson the 3 years that he raced in the Indy 500. And it was really it was a very special time to be part of that slice of local history here. So yeah, exactly what you say. Sports it's really part of the DNA of a community, especially people who have been in a community for a long time and they really embrace those memories and those great moments.
Absolutely. On everyone's journey, everyone's path, there's a chance where we can go east, we can go west. You make a decision not really knowing the outcome. Can you give me a time you did that?
Yeah, 2008 October, I had an opportunity to write something I had never. Long writing was not something. Uh, I'm really hesitant to admit it, other than close friends, because I know a lot of people have this ambition to write a book, and that was never mine. I never thought about long writing, and the opportunity to make a transition from television to long writing presented itself, and it was a very difficult decision to make. It was a very emotional time, um, really wrestling with the approach to take, and ultimately decided that things were presenting itself the way they were, then there was a reason behind it. One of those that always believes in that, and so I decided to pursue it. But it was a very difficult decision. Consulted three extremely close friends about it, and each one said, "Oh, you got to do this." Uh, so yeah, it was writing was not something long writing, I should say, was not something I ever dreamed of doing because it's so opposite of broadcast writing. Broadcast writing, you're writing in phrases. It's quick. It supports your breathing patterns, your speech patterns. Um, it's not at all like long writing, and never in my wildest dreams did I think about doing that. But a good friend of mine, a guy named Tom Watt over in England, he had written David Beckham's autobiography, and he connected me with his agent, and the agent was excited about a topic that was discussed, and without even my agreeing to be represented at that point, he had a meeting with a publisher the next day and brought up the idea for this book, and the publisher jumped at it, and then the agent called me and said, "We've got this opportunity," and it just created a few days of uh, deep emotions. Very very difficult time, but I made that transition. I'm glad I did. Yeah, it was a good time to make the transition, and I find that, as I said earlier, I really really enjoy long writing. I enjoy the storytelling, the creative expression that way, the research that goes into it, and yeah, I'm certainly very happy that I made that transition.
Absolutely. I wrote my college master's thesis on college football stadiums in the 1920s,
Ooh,
looking at memorial stadiums at Illinois, Indiana, and Minnesota. Just the idea that they were student led and student funded, and a lot of times we kind of look at the world a little bit more cynically. But in those times, especially, the students really wanted to give back to their universities. So they had the memorial gardens and benches, and I think a lot of it was that a little bit of ego on both sides. The students, oh, we want to give, instead of this bench, let's do a memorial stadium. And of course, administration, as I found through letters and correspondence, they weren't dumb either. A student led project that big seems like a really good idea if they can, pat them on the back and do all that. But it was one of those things where I kind of fell in love with the research, really fell in love with the research, and the deep into college football.
that's fascinating. I didn't realize that. That's really interesting.
I could talk about those three stadiums, at nausea sometimes, but it's all fun, and it's great to again be around like minded sports enthusiasts from time to time.
That's great. That's great.
I want to know, the title of the podcast, Into the Unknown. What are you stepping on? What are you working on?
What I'm working on now, what's the old line? If I tell you, I have to kill you. Well, a book that came out a few months back was called Baseball at the Abyss, story of the 1926 scandal that really has never really been given a lot of attention, but it involved Ty Cobb and Tris Speaker, two Hall of Famers, and their involvement in fixing and betting on games. And then it evolved into work that Babe Ruth did that same offseason to resurrect his struggling career, that produced his biggest season ever. And really, a lot of people felt the workout routine that he adopted that offseason was very revolutionary and maybe his greatest contribution to the game. It's something that players today all do. And so, yeah, it was a fun project to get into, especially when I stumbled onto the fact that the scandal emanated about 10 miles from my house, at a player by the name of Dutch Leonard, who I had heard of but really didn't know a lot about. And so I took a deep dive into him, and yeah, it was really fascinating. And what I'm tinkering with now is a biography of the first great black golfer in America, Ted Rhodes, golfer in the 40s and 50s, who really overcame tremendous odds and great discrimination to be able to achieve success in golf. It was the first African American to play in the U.S. Open, the first to play in a PGA event, and he, along with the boxer Joe Louis, led the charge to overturn the PGA's Caucasians only clause and see professional golf integrated. And many people felt that, had Rhodes been afforded the opportunity at a younger age to become a professional, and the opportunity to play at country clubs with much tougher courses than Muni courses, then he really may have been one of the greatest of all time. And he was an outstanding golfer, nonetheless. But it's been a fascinating research project, and just amazing to learn about him, considering I knew nothing about him up until a couple of months ago.
And I love that. It's always diving right into that research, and just it's impressive what you can learn just looking back at history. How it affects today. Even I always say that while history probably doesn't repeat itself, it often looks very familiar.
You're right. That's a good way to put it. You're absolutely right.
So something I want to dive into now. Your book on Kenny Washington. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Well, what was really surprising was that nothing had ever been done on Kenny Washington before. When I touched base with the acquisitions editor I work with at Roman and Littlefield, that was her response. She said, "Wait a minute, are you telling me no one's ever done this? Done anything on this guy?" And we were both really surprised, and I've heard that a lot since the book has come out. Um, I had heard of Kenny Washington, been to games at UCLA. My brother worked at UCLA, and so I'd certainly heard about him. I knew his number had been retired, but I didn't know a lot more than that about him. And once I got into it, I was overwhelmed. I mean, I think he's one of the maybe a small handful of the greatest football players of all time, and he's not talked about because we don't have much film of him. He's not talked about because he didn't get into the NFL until he was really over the hill, and it's a shame. And he's not talked about because he couldn't follow his true passion, which was baseball. And he may have been one of the greatest home run hitters of all time had he been able to follow that pursuit. So, a great friend of mine, a guy by the name of Artie Harris. He played one of the scouts in the movie Moneyball, Scout Artie, who was always sitting to the left of Brad Pitt. And Artie and I speak all the time. Artie's a UCLA guy, played baseball there in the 50s and taught there in the 60s. And we were talking about Jackie Robinson one day, I believe, is how we got onto it. And Artie said that when he was at UCLA, there were two professors, when he was teaching there as a grad student, there were two professors in the department who had been there in 1939. And both men said, hands down, Kenny Washington was the far better athlete to Jackie Robinson. And that kind of took me by surprise. And Artie said when he was a high school baseball coach and teacher, there was a PE coach at his high school who had been a teammate. He had been on that 39 UCLA football team. And that this guy was not a boastful guy. He wasn't one of these guys always throwing around a lot of hyperbole. But he said very matter of factly, Kenny Washington was far better than Jackie Robinson. Well, that's all I needed to hear. That got me doing the deep dive, and to learn about this guy was absolutely amazing. I was completely overwhelmed by just how good he was, just how popular he was in Los Angeles, far and away the most popular athlete in Southern California during the 30s and 40s. And it was just emotional to see, what could have been had America been different at that time. So I feel very, very fortunate that Artie opened that door, met some wonderful people in the research process. Kenny's family, his daughter, his grandkids were great. And yeah, it was a fascinating life life enriching project.
Is there anything that really stuck out in your mind, or is it just, I mean, the whole story, discovering the whole story of Kenny?
Well, I think the one thing that jumped out at me was here's a guy who could throw a football 100 yards in the air. And, the passing game was not a big part of football at that time. The football of that era was more like the rugby ball we see today, rounded ends, a little fatter. It was not an easy thing to throw. The football of today is made and geared more for throwing, but it wasn't back then. And here's a guy in high school, Jim Tunney, the great NFL referee. His father, Jim Senior, was Kenny's high school coach. And one day in his senior season, he wanted to see if Kenny could, in fact, throw a football 100 yards. So he put Kenny on one goal line and he put a receiver on the other goal line, and the receiver had to come out, I believe it was to the 4 yard line to make the catch. But I found other instances when Kenny was playing pro ball in the old Pacific Coast Football League, where they said playing for the Hollywood Bears, he did, in fact, throw a couple of times, throw a football 100 yards in the air. There was an amazing comeback his sophomore year when they played UCLA played USC in their annual big rivalry game in the Coliseum, and UCLA had a terrible afternoon, and suddenly, the passing game started clicking, and Kenny brought UCLA back, and he threw a forward pass that it was it was debated in the press box how far in the air the ball traveled. Some were saying 77 yards, some were saying closer to 80 yards, because he'd had to scramble to avoid a rush and circle back. And they went in and talked to the officials after the game to find out, get uh, confirmation of where he actually was when he released the ball. And they had to go to the newsreel photographers and the video, I mean the film photographers, the next day set up a screening to actually look at what they had, and they were able to pinpoint, I believe it was 73 yards in the air, which was just unheard of at that time. And some of the leading sports writers of the day, Grantland Rice, was the one that proclaimed it was the longest pass in college football history. So that really, on a national scale, kind of started the legend of Kenny Washington. In his senior year, the way he was treated in terms of awards, certainly his ethnicity had something to do with it. But West Coast college football, as we have seen over the decades, night games, those types of things really impact your coverage in the East. And there was no ESPN Sports Center back then, of course. So finding out about Kenny Washington on the East Coast and in the Deep South, and in parts of the Midwest, it was very difficult. So while he did get the Fairbanks Award as the 1939 College Football Player of the Year, he was not a finalist for the Heisman. And some of that was a lack of exposure, and some of that was the prejudices of Southern voters in particular.
Absolutely. The more and more research I did on Kenny throughout the years, it's just he's become almost like a folk hero in a lot of aspects, from his acting career to his sports to just kind of, from what I understand, who he was as a person. And so, me leaving the Hall of Fame and kind of going fully into my collector mode, I was able to, acquire some incredible Kenny Washington pieces. I want to show you just one of them. So
Ooh,
this is
interesting.
from the 1940 All Star Game, the Chicago
Yeah.
Tribune. It's a
Wow.
belt buckle. On the back, it has the, let's see,
Wow.
of course, it's not going to work when I want it, but it has K Washington on the back.
Wow. Interesting. Interesting.
And
Interesting.
I won't go into too much, but I can always appreciate it when someone who is interested is in Kenny as well as I am. So this is his
Lincoln High School is letter.
1935 letter,
Wow.
and
Wow.
with that also came the certificate he got.
Very interesting. Yeah. Look at
And
that.
Of course, way too many of his rookie cards, his cards.
Yep. Yeah.
So I've been fortunate enough to find some of these things, acquire them. It was funny because right before it's just again to go to the lore of Kenny Washington. Of course, they had the Golden
Oh
Gate
yeah.
Ball, their version of the
Right.
World's Fair, and it's Kenny Washington's collegians versus Ernie's professionals.
And he was really the first African American player that all star teams were built around. And he did a few games that way. But yeah, that was a big game in San Francisco. We talked about that in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and I won't grab them
You
all,
got
but
some gems.
I have some, not his yearbooks yet, but I have the 37. I just picked up the 39, and of course the 1941, which is that one is probably my favorite thing. It's funny because the 37 just got here before we went on. That's actually I was paging through it, before, but just to see, him, Jackie, Woody Strode, and all those guys. It just was, something, a bit of an honor. And of course, I know the photos are online, but there's just something about having the book, you know,
Oh, you're right. You're right.
on my desk is something I think any
Yeah,
true sports fan or historian can, appreciate and enjoy.
absolutely. And that 39 team, there was some terrific talent there. I mean, Woody Strode, we don't know a lot about him other than Spartacus, but he was a terrific actor. But at UCLA, he began in his first 2 or 3 years at UCLA. He was a decathlete, and really they felt that he was in line to be the American decathlete in the 1940 Olympic Games. Had they not been canceled by war, he actually got involved in a bit of a spat with the coaches over an injury. He felt they didn't believe that he was hurt as bad as he was, wanted him to compete, and he just walked away from the sport. But and also he joined Kenny in integrating the NFL with the Rams, and then he later was among the players to integrate the Canadian Football League when he went up to Calgary after being cut by the Rams. So a tremendous history there as well. Jackie Robinson, maybe the greatest athlete in American history. You look at what had there been a 1940 Olympics, he probably would have been the gold medal winner in the long jump. Had the records, NCAA records, junior college records in the long jump, the leading basketball scorer in the Pacific Coast Conference for UCLA. And ironically, his worst sport at UCLA was baseball. He hit like 097 at baseball and struggled a lot. I mean, when he could get on with walks and whatnot, he stole a lot of bases, but yeah, it was really his worst sport. And then, of course, football, he was a second team All America in 1940 with the Bruins as well. So, yeah, remarkable. Ned Matthews, the quarterback on that 39 team, played with the inaugural San Francisco 49ers. So, yeah, there were some outstanding players on those teams that Kenny was a part of, and those yearbooks hold a lot of great history.
They do, and it's just been such an honor to even just have them in my possession, and going through them, and it's just been great. And again, that 1940 team is just such a fascinating, I'd say, a moment in time, moment in history. As you mentioned, you got actors, you got professional athletes, you got people who truly are trailblazers, all on one team playing one or a couple sports.
Yeah, it was a remarkable time, and of course, it was just a remarkable time around that team. You looked at so many of the F. Scott Fitzgerald, Bing Crosby, people like that were regulars at UCLA games. Joe E. Brown. I mean, F. Scott Fitzgerald said that his favorite athlete was Kenny Washington. I mean, it's just remarkable to see the support they had, and of course, that last game of Kenny's college career, they set a college football record with 103,300 fans, all of whom gave Kenny a remarkable standing ovation as he left the field. Yeah, it was a very special time.
I hope one day it has a movie script in the writing.
Well, it's in the works. It is in the works. I don't know how much I'm at liberty to say, but contracts have been signed and it is in the works. So
You
I'm
know,
excited about that. I think it's something that Kenny's legacy deserves.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. So if people want to find this book, what's it called? Where can they get it? And where can they reach out to you if they, want to learn more about you and your career?
Walking Alone is the name of the title, and is the title of the book. Roman and Littlefield, the publisher. Like most books these days, Amazon's an easy landing spot to find it, but Barnes and Noble online also has it. Roman and Littlefield's direct website is Roman, ROWMAN.com. Me, I am on X or Twitter for those of you who are a little like me, a little slow to embrace change, and Facebook at Writin, WRITIN guy, GUI, is where I can be found. And yeah, I love to visit with like-minded sports fans. It'd be great fun.
Well, Dan, I want to again appreciate the time. I'll make sure to link all that in the show notes. Just thanks again for
Oh,
being here, and I really appreciate it.
Oh no, thank you. This was a lot of fun. Love to. Wish we could chat for hours and hours. I think we probably could. So who knows, one day by phone or whatnot. But you're great. Thanks for the opportunity. It was a real treat to be with you.
Take it easy. That was another fun episode of Into the Unknown. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. And if it provides you any value or entertainment, I would love if you shared it with others, liked, subscribed, and really just help the podcast grow. Again, tell a friend, tell a foe, just anyone who might enjoy hearing some stories of people's own journeys and what got them to where they are today. Till next time.